It's not standard to start a review with a statement like this, but I have to say right off the bat, under no circumstances should you buy the Nintendo Switch version of this game. And I will go into exactly why in the visuals and performance section, but suffice to say this little clip might provide some context.
What the? How can they ship that?
Quidditch Champions, quietly released back on September the 3rd, and ironically was actually developed by a team called Unbroken Studios. Well, yeah. And it's published by Warner Brothers Games under the Portkey Games label. While it's available now on almost all platforms, we're looking at the Nintendo Switch edition, which they've launched in time for the holiday season. Is the Nintendo Switch version of Harry Potter Quidditch Champions a real keeper? Well, let's sliver in and find out. First up, we've got gameplay and controls. We can almost entirely skip storyline. It's a basic setup as you as a new player. You create your own character from a few available presets, customizing skin color, hair, although they clearly have something against beards. I guess a bearded pupil might be a little odd, but you know, it does happen. And then you begin to form up your team. Before any of this though, there's an initial login screen. This requires you to not only be online, but I actually had to use a mobile phone to create an account before it would sign me in. I had to scan an on-screen QR code. It wasn't the most laborious procedure, but you hate to see it. If this was gifted to someone at Christmas, the last thing you want to have to do is to go and grab a laptop or a phone and then get an adult to log you in. So if you're thinking about playing this just for single player, you will still need an internet connection. Once you're finally in, you've got the options of career mode, which can be played solo or online co-op. There is crossplay available in every single gameplay mode as well. You've got multiplayer mode, 6v6, an exhibition mode, and of course an area to practice. Let's start with the single player career before we look at the online performance as well. For those unfamiliar with Quidditch, I'll try and break down how the game works. Matches take place on a 6v6 basis with different roles within the team. You have your 3 chasers, who as the title suggests will be chasing after the ball, which is called a quaffle. Movement feels a little bit like a flight simulator, although you can invert the controls early on to suit your tastes, and you can also drift in the air to do quick turns. The chasers spend most of their time in possession of the quaffle or hunting it down and tackling the enemy player. All team members have a limited boost bar and can also refresh their boost by flying through these different coloured rings. The aim of the game is to get the most points by throwing the quaffle through one of the 3 opposing enemy hoops. Outside of chasers, you've also got beaters. They carry a club with them, and their main goal is to disrupt other players, usually in a most violent way, either with that club or by using what are known as bludgers, which can be thrown around. Now, if you're on the receiving end of one of those, if you take too much damage, you'll actually get knocked off of your broom, which for certain roles within the team can be devastating, things like the chaser. In single player, you can press a button to receive a pass from your team, or at least let them know you want one, and you can also press up on the D-pad to switch between any of the roles that you can see. So it's a relatively simple case of get the ball in the hole, tackle the other player, try and avoid getting tackled yourself by pressing a button at just the right moment to do a few acrobatics, but then the wild card element, that comes in the form of the golden snitch. The snitch is introduced to a round randomly. When it is, you've got a couple of options. You can either completely ignore it and let your team hopefully catch it, or take control of the seeker. Now, it is the seeker's sole job to simply catch the snitch. But first you've got to find it. It makes a very distinct sound, so it doesn't take long to track down, and once it does, you've got to sit on its tail, a bit like an aerial dogfight, going through the hoops it drops, which gives you a boost and gradually increases a bar around it until it turns blue, and then you're able to catch it. This actually takes quite a bit of time, and you've also got a rival who will be doing the same thing, plus those pesky beaters with their bludgers. They can come out of nowhere and take you down. Mechanically speaking, if you're playing as a seeker, it is actually quite intense, especially if the scoreline is not in your favor, because if you catch that snitch, it gives your team a huge chunk of points. I experienced an online game where we were losing quite badly, and then our seeker just caught it, bringing the game level. And it's moments like that where this is at its best. The final role that you might be playing then is the keeper. They control slightly differently. You can move and strafe with those, and it will show your relation to the goal. Keepers can also plot strategy points, which again are essentially hoops for your team to go through to give them a speed advantage when carrying the quaffle, because it inherently slows you down. Now, there are a couple of other mechanics in there, like the goalkeeper being able to kick it, a few different more advanced moves, but that's the essential gist of it. try and score the most goals within the time to win against the other houses and eventually win all the tournaments. There are 4 main tournaments that you can access, and if you're halfway through one, you can actually leave back out to the hub area to upgrade, improve your characters, and then jump back in for the next round. And I guess that's probably a good time to talk about skills and upgrades. Now, aside from customizing their appearance with different cosmetics that you might have won, it is worth mentioning that there are no microtransactions, even if they've decided to lay out the game visually to look exactly like a free-to-play game. Now, I know exactly why they've done that. It's because that style is inherently compulsive. When you've got a challenge of the day with a set number of gems or a limited time offer in the shop, it's essentially trying to create an addiction loop. With that in mind, it doesn't necessarily affect the gameplay, and it won't affect the gameplay score, but I don't really like to see it. I think they could have done things slightly differently there. It just comes off as a little cheap. Your level, so to speak, is tied to your equipment level. So for example, when you unlock a new broom, that might have better statistics. You can then spend some of the game's currencies, again, no microtransactions, to upgrade that broom until it reaches its max. If you apply a skill upgrade to a chaser, then it affects all of those, and skill points are dished out based on victories and other criteria throughout your matches, giving you an overall level. If you jump online, you will have a slight wait time, depending on when you do it, but thankfully crossplay means you should usually be able to get a game, with the option as well of using ranked matches or a more casual match that might include bots. As far as online netcode goes, performance here has been passable. The main issue for being a Switch player comes from the performance, but I didn't experience any major lag. I was able to keep up with other players, even though I'm not the best, but I'm sure it would be an easier experience with a clearer image running at 60 frames per second. The actual balancing of the sport itself is really well done, surprisingly so. It takes a little while to learn, but that aspect is actually okay. It's everything else that surrounds it that doesn't feel up to snuff. There's a cheapness to proceedings. The progression through the tournaments, it just feels a little sluggish, and when the frame rates drop, the controls take a big hit. This will certainly affect things like the Seeker role, which is massively important. I think longevity is going to be an issue as well in terms of enjoyment. Gameplay scores 14 out of 20. It's actually much better than I thought it would be. Controls, they take a hit. They score 12 out of 20. This then takes us on to visuals and performance, and this may be the first section many of you jump to, and I honestly wouldn't blame you. The Nintendo Switch version of Quidditch Champions is a disgrace. I don't use that lightly. I'm not here having a hissy fit about it, but there are a number of issues. Firstly, having to log in using a mobile phone. I said that already. That's a slight issue, but I can get over it. Then when you get into the game's menus, before you've even reached any kind of tournament, it feels like the side gig of whoever created the eShop. It's incredibly laggy. The audio will often cut in and out, and even within these menus, the visual quality is pretty poor. Your characters look blurry, there's a decent amount of aliasing on the edges of the models, and it does not paint a rosy picture for things to come. So you load into your first match. The engine struggles a little here, and you will see textures gradually load in over time, starting out at Vaseline and ending up somewhere between porridge and soup, but you still hold out hopes. The camera pans to all of the characters on pitch, and again we see aliasing issues, a drop in performance, and a visual hit. The game's targeting 30 frames per second. It can't maintain it a lot of the time. It really can't maintain it whenever there's a celebration, which isn't necessarily a huge issue, but when it drops down into the 10, 15 frames per second, it can be a little nauseating. But then something happened which I showed you briefly at the start. I had massive artifacting in several of my matches, so much so that it needs to come with its own epilepsy warning. With that in mind, if you do suffer from that, please don't watch the next section. As you can see, it's absolutely terrible. It looks like a graphics chip dying. However, this Nintendo Switch is used all the time. It's been used after this to test that my graphics card isn't dying. It's a bug, a glitch within the game. What I've also found is that once this goes on for some time, it might go away for a while, maybe for a match or two, then it'll come back, and then I'll start to get hit with the crashes. I've had a few of these now, crashing me out of the game entirely, meaning you have to go back in through the rigmarole of logging in. So when I say disgraceful, like I genuinely mean it. It's a multi-billion-dollar company with a multi-billion-dollar franchise pushing a release so that they can hit the Christmas schedule, and it runs like this. Then when we asked for a code, it's not a huge surprise when they say, oh, we haven't got any codes to give out. As soon as I hear that, I go and purchase the game, and well, you can see what you can see. So, I'm not making some huge statement here. I'm just saying, from our perspective, it's unacceptable. And I would not be surprised if Nintendo would be refunding some on this unless they can do a serious patch-up job. The performance issues don't stop there. When it comes to sound and audio, I've experienced several sound cutouts. During cutscenes, the audio will switch from stereo to mono. So if you've got a set of headphones in, you'll hear the commentators, and then all of a sudden it'll only be in one ear. That will then remain for the rest of the time until it reaches either another cutscene or you end the round. The films do have a wealth of quality music to tap into, and that aspect is probably the redeeming factor, but the commentators are also quite weak. And it sounds like they haven't balanced the audio levels, so you may have to do that manually yourself in the menus. When you hit around and it's all running flawlessly, it would probably be around about a 12 out of 20 visually, but with these issues, there's not a great deal I can say. Right now on Nintendo Switch, visuals and performance combined, they score 2 out of 20. Sound and audio scores 10 out of 20. That then takes us on to value. Now, I paid, I believe, £24.99. There is a version that will cost you a tenner more than that includes a few cosmetic items. Glen informs me that there is also a physical available, but that this is a code in a box. With the performance that we currently have on Nintendo Switch, value takes a massive hit. If you're buying physically and it's just a code in a box, well, you're not buying physically. There's not much here at all that reflects £25 or your regional equivalent. The 4 tournaments won't take you a great deal of time to work through. Maxing out levels also doesn't take long. It's really how much enjoyment you get out of the online when it's working. I give value 6 out of 20. Harry Potter Quidditch Champions is a mess on Nintendo Switch. When you have this much money at your disposal and you choose to release in this state, I think you lose a lot of goodwill, particularly as the Switch has a very large younger audience contingent. It gets a SwitchUp score of 44%. Thanks to all of you that watched. I hope this was a fair review. I don't like being really negative about something, but this one took me off guard, I have to say. Thanks to our Patreons and members, all of you that enjoy the content. Let me know down below what you thought. And as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!